We're on the move. We have an investigation to conduct. Hello and welcome to SquatchBot.com. I'm Darren Smith, and I've returned to Road 426 once again to conduct an investigation on the interesting FLIR footage that we picked up from the other evening. Since I moved to this area 3 months ago, I've received a number of reports of Sasquatch road crossings along this short 1-mile stretch of Road 426, just outside of Oakhurst, California, near Bass Lake. During my investigation of this area, I have come to the conclusion that this location has a very high probability of Sasquatch activity. One side of the road is a hillside that comes down from a very prominent ridge that is populated with small residential areas and sporadic homesteads, many of which have gardens, orchards, and farm animals, most notably chickens. On the other side of the road is very thick vegetation, rough terrain, which eventually turns into a very steep incline that leads into the backcountry, a perfect escape route for a Sasquatch. And since I've been investigating this area, I have had a number of very curious happenings. During my first exploration of the area, I discovered an interesting impression. Though I do not dub this a Sasquatch track, what did catch my eye was the general shape and a possible toe and mid-tarsal break. The track was only about 12 inches long, and as there are no other tracks in the area, I did not pay much attention to it. However, as always, if you encounter anything out of the ordinary, you should document it. You never know when something might become the piece of the puzzle you've been looking for. While my niece and I were in the field, we discovered a number of very well-groomed game trails. As I've mentioned before, Sasquatch will often groom game trails to make them easier to traverse. And that evening, while we were conducting night maneuvers, we picked up some rather interesting audio. Though the audio is most likely coyote, there are a number of researchers who are not as dismissive and are encouraging that the vocalizations may have come from a Sasquatch. And while alone in the field late one night last week, I encountered this tree fall. Sasquatch will often push over trees in an attempt to chase off intruders, and as I held my ground, I picked up some rather interesting FLIR footage. After reviewing all the FLIR footage and doing a visual analysis, I decided this footage needed to be investigated. So I returned to Road 426 to conduct an analysis and do a recreation. This is what prompted this investigation. To give us bearing, this log and this tree stump will act as anchors between still shots. The red rectangle is where the image will eventually appear. When initially reviewing the footage, what began the intrigue was the change in background that I was observing. As you can see in this still shot, the figure in question is not within the red rectangle. However, in the background, I noticed this curious shape. What I found interesting was on the next FLIR footage that I captured moments later, the subject appeared to have moved from the background location to the foreground. And when reviewing the still shots, I observed some very intriguing Sasquatch characteristics. When looking at the still FLIR footage, it looks like a standing figure that is being partially obstructed by an object. Sasquatch will often hide behind trees, peering out to observe. I found this footage very consistent with the other proposed Sasquatch FLIR footage that I have seen. Sasquatch getting caught on a FLIR as it was peering out from behind a tree. I have had a number of conversations with respected Sasquatch researchers who theorize that Sasquatch seem to understand our visual limitations at night, and they are more apt to boldly approach humans under the cover of night, oftentimes getting within very close proximity. Enlarging the head area, I became very intrigued. These are some of the observations or comparisons I made while reviewing the FLIR footage, which raised the alarm that there is a possibility this was a Sasquatch, and an investigation was absolutely warranted. First off, the behavior of a Sasquatch peering out from behind a tree has been well documented, so the behavior was consistent. Next, the overall appearance looked good. No clearly defined neck. Very large barreled chest and upper body. Very long arms, and looking at the various FLIR footage, it does appear that these arms were moving. Very large muscular legs with a low set knee, and a big foot. Looking at the head, I noticed a number of very interesting similarities. The appearance of a sagittal crest, pronounced brow ridge, very large deep-set eyes, an elongated face with a low-set mouth. These physical attributes, coupled with the behavioral characteristics noted, knocking down trees and peering out from behind them, I was adamant that an investigation had to be conducted. So I returned to Road 426 to conduct an analysis of the FLIR footage, and I was also interested in seeing if I could track down the tree fall from the previous evening. On our last episode, I pointed out some of the benefits to squatching during the winter time. Another such benefit, I haven't seen a mosquito in months. But it is important to remember that when out in the elements, you dress accordingly. And as Sasquatch research usually entails a lot of sitting around, you're going to want to make sure that you are well insulated. Also make sure that you have proper rain gear, just in case. This rain gear can also be used as a ground cover for when you're sitting in wet brush. Arriving at the location, I used a road map of the FLIR footage to track down the area where the subject from the FLIR footage was standing. Here you can clearly see the anchors we used during the FLIR analysis. Here is the log and the tree stump, and this was the location where the subject was standing. Also, as I pointed out on the FLIR footage, it appeared that the subject was being partially obstructed by an object. It looked as if the subject was peering out from behind a tree. However, arriving at the location, I soon discovered what I thought was flat terrain was actually a very steep incline, and the only tree that was at that location was a very small, new-growth pine tree. Clearly, this tree was not large enough to have created the obstruction that appeared on the subject, and although everything was lining up perfectly, the pieces of this puzzle were just not falling into place. Also, as I explained during the FLIR analysis, when reviewing the FLIR footage, it had appeared that there had been movement in the background, and it looked as though the subject in question had moved from an area in the background to its final position in the foreground. However, when investigating that area, it had become clear that due to the gorge that was present, not only would that area in the background where the figure had been standing would have been several feet off the ground, it was also heavily obstructed by the pine trees in the foreground. Therefore, it would have been impossible for the FLIR to have captured something standing in that location. I'm going with the assumption that if a Sasquatch was going to push over a tree in an attempt to scare somebody out of the area, the Sasquatch would have a line of sight with the individual it was trying to chase off. The tree break from the other evening occurred from somewhere in that direction, and as you can see behind me, there's plenty of locations where a Sasquatch could have stood and had a perfect line of sight of my position, which was just behind the camera here. I have searched the area down below, though not as thoroughly as I would have liked due to time constraints, and I did see a number of tree falls. However, none of them appear to have been as fresh as 2 nights ago, so that leads me to believe that the tree break occurred further down in this ravine, at which point I don't think there would have been that line of sight. One of the most important aspects of Sasquatch research is to do a proper investigation of the anomalies that you encounter. When I discovered the FLIR footage from the other evening, I became rather excited. However, coming back to the location and doing a recreation, I would say that it would have been impossible for this to have been a Sasquatch. By taking this sort of approach into Sasquatch research, you can rule out a lot of misidentifications and you can have a lot of the mysteries solved. And by doing this, your research is going to stand with much more credibility. My philosophy is always debunk, debunk, debunk. And when it gets to the point where you encounter something that's not easily explained, that's when things get interesting. Another point I should mention, when I make a claim dismissing the possibility that an event was the result of Sasquatch activity, I'm working from the position of my personal observations and understanding. And although I have had a number of very bizarre, unexplained happenings while conducting Sasquatch research, which many would consider paranormal in nature, I try to maintain a position with the common reality in an attempt to be more grounded with my approach. However, this being said, I do try to maintain an open mind and be sensitive to the other opinions, although I may not be vocal about them. Frankly, until this mystery is solved, all we have are theories, and although many feel otherwise, human understanding is not always reality. I believe as amateur researchers, if we take this approach with Sasquatch research and try to be more open-minded to the possibilities and impossibilities, I think we have a much better chance of making a major discovery. At one point, the world was flat. And if you had told me when I was young that we would be carrying wireless video phones and televisions in our pockets, I would have said you had watched too much Star Trek. However, lo and behold, technological impossibilities are now a common reality. Therefore, I would like to rephrase my previous statement. According to my understanding of reality, and based on my investigation, the figure I captured on the FLIR the other evening could not have been a Sasquatch. Could this image have been an interdimensional being stepping into our reality, or an extraterrestrial decloaking? I have no idea. However, the size and shape and the surprisingly similar physical and behavioral characteristics are not easily dismissible. Lastly, I want to show you something unusual. As I mentioned previously, I am not sold on FLIR technology. I think it is very cumbersome to use in the field, and it can be very difficult to interpret what you see. Take, for example, this still shot from the FLIR footage I obtained the other evening. I was focused on what I thought was a Sasquatch obstructed by brush in the background. However, take another close look at this photograph. I have not tampered with this image in any way. This is the image I was focused on. But reviewing the photograph in greater detail, I noticed this. Is this the face of a forest mother bowing her head in remorse? Could this be a ghostly image of Anubis, the Egyptian god with the dog-like head on a human body? And this looks like a giant troll to me. My point, when moving around in the dark or when interpreting blob squatches, your imagination can paint quite a convincing picture. However, it is very important you try to stay grounded with your approach and be very reserved when placing the Sasquatch stamp on anything inconclusive without doing a thorough investigation. Also, you should share the discoveries you make while on the field, even if you don't understand them. Someone may have encountered the same thing, and better yet, someone may have the answers you seek. By sharing and comparing notes on the mysteries we encounter while on the field, we have a much better chance of making a major discovery. I'm Darren Smith, and I'll see you here next time on SquatchSpot.com.